They called her too delicate for mountain life, but beneath her silk gloves lay hands that would learn to heal both land and heart. The October wind carried the scent of pine and snow down from the towering peaks, whipping through Eleanor Whitmore's carefully arranged auburn curls as she stepped from the dusty stagecoach onto the wooden platform of Pine Ridge Station. Her emerald traveling dress, perfectly tailored for Boston's cobblestone streets, seemed almost garish against the muted browns and grays of the Colorado mountain settlement. The thin air made her lightheaded, each breath a conscious effort in the rarefied atmosphere that sat nearly 8,000 feet above the sea level she had always known. Around her, the world stretched in dimensions her city-trained eyes struggled to comprehend. Mountains rose like ancient guardians, their peaks already dusted with early snow that caught the afternoon sun like scattered diamonds. The silence was profound, broken only by the whisper of wind through towering pines and the distant call of a hawk circling high overhead. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Your comment helps our community grow stronger. Thanks, and let's get back to the story. Eleanor clutched her leather traveling case with fingers that trembled not from cold, but from the overwhelming realization of how far she had traveled from everything familiar. Behind her lay Boston, with its predictable rhythms of afternoon tea, evening concerts, and morning constitutional walks through manicured public gardens. Ahead lay an uncertain future with a man she had never met, in a wilderness that seemed to stretch beyond the edges of the world itself. Thomas McKenna stood beside a weather-beaten wagon, his broad shoulders filling out a wool coat that had seen many seasons. He was taller than she had imagined from his carefully worded letters, with hands that spoke of years spent working with wood and stone and stubborn mountain soil. His dark hair was touched with silver at the temples, and his eyes held the particular clarity that came from looking across vast distances every day. When their gazes met, she saw neither disappointment nor approval, but rather a patient assessment, as if he were reading the weather in her face. The ride to his ranch took them along narrow trails that switched back and forth up the mountainside, the wagon wheels finding purchase on paths that seemed carved from sheer determination. Eleanor gripped the wooden seat as they climbed higher, her stomach lurching not just from the winding road, but from the growing awareness of her complete unfamiliarity with this vertical world. Below them, the valley floor fell away in dizzying drops, while above, the peaks seemed to lean inward, creating a sense of both shelter and confinement that her flat-horizon-trained mind could not quite process. Thomas spoke little during the journey, but his silence felt comfortable rather than awkward, punctuated by quiet observations about the changing season, the early snow, the way the aspen leaves had turned to golden coins scattered across the mountainsides. His voice carried the cadence of a man accustomed to solitude, each word considered and placed with care, like stones in a well-built wall. The ranch itself appeared gradually, first as smoke rising from a stone chimney, then as the warm glow of lamplight and windows, and finally as a collection of sturdy log buildings nestled in a natural clearing surrounded by protective stands of pine and spruce. The main house was larger than she had expected, built with the kind of solid craftsmanship that promised warmth against mountain winters. A wide porch wrapped around the front and side, offering views across the valley that stretched toward distant peaks painted purple by the approaching evening. Eleanor's first night in the mountains was a symphony of unfamiliar sounds. The wind moved differently here, singing through the pines with voices she had never learned to read. Coyotes called from distant ridges, their wild harmonies raising goosebumps along her arms. The house itself seemed to breathe with the temperature changes, wood expanding and contracting with small sighs and settling sounds that made her start awake repeatedly, listening for footsteps that never came. Thomas had shown her to a comfortable room with a view toward the eastern peaks, where morning would first touch the mountaintops with rose and gold. The furnishings were simple but well-made, clearly crafted by hands that understood both beauty and utility. A colorful quilt covered the bed, its pattern of interlocking stars reflecting the brilliant clarity of mountain night skies. On the small table beside the window sat a mason jar filled with late-blooming wildflowers, purple asters and golden black-eyed Susans that spoke of thoughtfulness beneath his reserved exterior. Morning arrived with a grandeur that took her breath away. The sun crested the eastern peaks and sent long fingers of light racing across the valley, illuminating frost that had formed during the night like scattered crystals on every surface. The air was so clear it seemed she could reach out and touch individual trees on distant mountainsides. But with the beauty came the immediate reality of her complete inadequacy for this life. The kitchen stove, a massive iron beast that heated both water and food, required skills she had never needed in Boston, where servants had managed such practical matters. Her first attempt at breakfast produced coffee that could have stripped paint and biscuits that resembled charcoal more than bread. Thomas accepted both with gracious equanimity, though she caught him discreetly feeding portions of the biscuits to his border collie, a patient creature named Scout who seemed to understand the diplomatic necessities of the situation. The weeks that followed established a rhythm of small disasters and smaller victories. Eleanor approached each domestic challenge with the same methodical determination that had served her well in Boston's charitable organizations, but the mountains demanded different skills entirely. Water had to be hauled from the well, wood needed splitting and stacking, and the simple act of maintaining warmth required constant attention to fires that seemed determined to die the moment she looked away. Thomas proved to be a patient teacher, though his instruction came more through quiet demonstration than lengthy explanation. He showed her how to read the subtle signs that indicated when the stove was ready for baking, how to split kindling with efficient economy of motion, how to preserve the last of the garden vegetables before winter settled in earnest. His hands, so much larger than hers, moved with surprising delicacy when he guided her fingers to feel the proper consistency of bread dough or demonstrated the angle needed to make an axe bite cleanly through wood. The altitude continued to challenge her. Simple tasks left her breathless, and she often found herself stopping to rest during activities that would have been effortless at sea level. But gradually, her body began to adapt, her lungs learning to extract what they needed from the thinner air, her legs growing stronger from navigating the uneven terrain around the ranch. October gave way to November with a series of storms that painted the peaks white and sent early snow swirling around the ranch buildings. Eleanor watched from the kitchen window as Thomas moved through his daily routines with the steady competence of someone who had learned to work with rather than against the mountain weather. He checked on the horses in the barn, repaired fence sections damaged by wind, and split endless cords of wood that would keep them warm through the long winter months ahead. During one particularly fierce storm, when the wind howled like a living thing and snow drove horizontally past the windows, Eleanor realized she had stopped thinking about Boston's familiar comforts. Instead, she found herself focused on the immediate concerns of mountain life, whether they had enough firewood stacked on the porch, if the animals were secure in the barn, how long the storm might last, and what it would mean for their daily routines. The transformation was gradual, noticed more in moments of reflection than in daily awareness. Her hands, once soft and protected, developed calluses from splitting kindling and carrying water. Her arms grew stronger from kneading bread and lifting heavy pots. Her legs found sure footing on mountain paths that had initially seemed treacherous. More significantly, her mind began to attune itself to the rhythms of mountain life, reading weather signs and the behavior of clouds, understanding the daily migrations of shadow and sunlight across the valley floor. Thomas noticed the changes too, though he expressed his awareness more through small gestures than words. He began trusting her with more complex tasks, showing her how to tend the vegetable cellar where root crops would keep through winter, teaching her to identify the tracks of different animals in the snow, sharing his knowledge of which plants could be harvested for medicinal teas. When she successfully baked her first batch of truly edible bread, his smile held the warmth of genuine pride, as if her victory were his own. The turning point came during a December blizzard that lasted 3 days and left them effectively cut off from the world beyond the ranch. Eleanor had initially felt trapped, claustrophobic in the face of such complete isolation. But as the hours passed, she discovered an unexpected peace in their small, warm world. The kitchen became a haven where she and Thomas worked side by side, preparing meals, mending clothes, and sharing quiet conversations that revealed depths in both of them that polite Boston society had never allowed to surface. He told her about his years as a young man working in the mines, how he had saved every penny to buy this land, and build a life that balanced solitude with purpose. She found herself sharing memories of Boston that she had never articulated before, not the social obligations and prescribed activities, but the moments of real beauty she had discovered in quiet corners of the city, the satisfaction she had found in organizing charitable efforts that made genuine differences in people's lives. On the second night of the storm, when the wind had finally exhausted itself into occasional gusts and the snow fell in gentle, straight lines past the windows, Eleanor realized she was no longer thinking about this as a temporary situation to be endured. Somewhere during the weeks of small struggles and smaller triumphs, the mountain ranch had begun to feel like home. The realization surprised her with its completeness. She had expected to miss Boston more, to feel a constant pull toward the familiar rhythms of city life. Instead, she found herself planning for spring, imagining the garden she would plant, the improvements she might suggest for the kitchen, the books she could order to build a proper library in the unused room upstairs. Christmas arrived with clear skies and temperatures so cold that breath crystallized instantly in the thin air. Eleanor had worried about celebrating the holiday without the elaborate traditions of her Boston family, but Thomas surprised her with a pine tree that he had cut and decorated with simple ornaments carved from wood and dried berries strung on thread. Under the tree lay a gift that revealed more thought than its modest appearance suggested, a pair of sturdy leather gloves, sized exactly for her hands, with lamb's wool lining that would keep her fingers warm during outdoor work. Her gift for him had been born of necessity rather than tradition, a wool scarf she had knitted during the long evenings by the fire, using yarn unraveled from an old sweater and techniques half-remembered from childhood lessons. But when he wrapped it around his neck and smiled with genuine pleasure, she understood that the gift's value lay not in its material worth but in the hours of caring attention it represented. January tested them with storms that made December's weather seem mild by comparison. Temperatures dropped so low that water left outside froze solid within minutes, and the wind carried a cutting edge that could steal warmth through the smallest gaps in clothing or shelter. But Eleanor faced these challenges with growing confidence, her body now adapted to the altitude, her skills honed by months of practice, her mind attuned to the daily rhythms that kept them safe and comfortable in their mountain sanctuary. During one particularly harsh week, when even Thomas admitted that the cold was exceptional, Eleanor took over most of the indoor work to allow him to focus on the demanding outside tasks of keeping animals fed and watered, maintaining fires in the outbuildings, and ensuring that their supply lines to the outside world remained functional. She found herself moving through the house with efficient purpose, managing multiple tasks simultaneously, her hands now sure and competent with tools and techniques that had once seemed impossibly complex. The change in their relationship was as gradual and natural as the seasonal transitions that painted the mountain landscape in ever-shifting colors. What had begun as polite accommodation evolved into comfortable partnership, and then into something deeper and more enduring. They worked together with the kind of unspoken coordination that developed between people who had learned to read each other's rhythms and anticipate each other's needs. February brought the first hints that winter's grip was beginning to loosen. Days grew perceptibly longer, and the quality of light began to change, carrying within it the promise of eventual spring. Eleanor found herself walking outside more often, her body now capable of handling the cold and altitude with relative ease. From the porch, she could see the entire valley spread below, a white wilderness of extraordinary beauty and profound silence. One morning, as she stood watching the sunrise paint the peaks in shades of rose and gold, Thomas joined her in the comfortable silence they had learned to share. Without words, he handed her a cup of coffee, the steam rising between them in the cold air. They stood together, shoulders almost touching, watching the day transform the landscape from monochrome winter to the subtle colors that would eventually bloom into spring. It was then that Eleanor realized the complete extent of her transformation. The woman who had stepped off the stagecoach 6 months earlier had been shaped by city expectations and city limitations. That woman had measured her worth by social accomplishments and approval from others, had defined her capabilities by the narrow range of activities considered appropriate for her class and gender. The woman who stood on the mountain porch that February morning was someone entirely different. Her hands were strong and capable, marked by honest work that served real purposes. Her body had adapted to challenges that would have seemed impossible in her previous life. Most importantly, her spirit had expanded to fill the vast spaces of mountain country, had learned to find beauty and meaning in simplicity and solitude. When Thomas turned to her with a smile that held both affection and respect, Eleanor understood that she had found something more valuable than the security she had sought when she answered his advertisement for a mail-order bride. She had discovered her own authentic self, stripped of pretense and artificial limitations, revealed through the honest demands of mountain life. Spring arrived with the gradual persistence of all mountain seasons, first as a quality of light, then as the sound of water running under melting snow, and finally as the first brave wildflowers pushing through patches of bare earth. Eleanor planned her garden with the knowledge gained through a winter of root cellar management, understanding now which vegetables would thrive at altitude and which preservation methods would carry them through the next winter's isolation. The rhythm of their days took on the urgency of mountain spring, when the brief growing season demanded immediate attention to planting, repairs, and preparation for the year ahead. Eleanor worked beside Thomas with the competence born of experience, her contributions now essential rather than merely helpful. When neighbors from distant ranches visited for the first time since autumn, they remarked on the obvious partnership between the couple, the way they moved together through tasks with natural coordination and mutual respect. Summer brought its own challenges and rewards. The thin air that had once left her breathless now seemed normal, and she found herself hiking mountain trails that would have been unthinkable during her first weeks on the ranch. The garden flourished under her care, producing vegetables that would fill their root cellar and herbs that would season their meals through another winter. She learned to preserve meat, can vegetables, and manage the complex logistics of mountain self-sufficiency. But beyond the practical skills, Eleanor had discovered something deeper and more enduring. In the vast spaces of mountain country, surrounded by peaks that had stood unchanged for millennia, she had found a sense of her own place in the larger patterns of existence. The woman who had once measured her days in social obligations and city conveniences now found meaning in work that served immediate, practical purposes, in relationships built on mutual dependence and respect rather than social convention. As autumn returned to paint the aspen groves in brilliant gold and the first snow dusted the highest peaks, Eleanor realized that her transformation was complete. She was no longer a city woman trying to adapt to mountain life, but a mountain woman who had found her authentic home. The isolation that had once frightened her now provided the space she needed to discover her own capabilities. The challenges that had initially seemed overwhelming had become the foundation of a confidence deeper than any she had known in her previous life. The year had come full circle, but Eleanor understood that she had not simply returned to a starting point. Instead, she had completed a journey of self-discovery that had revealed capacities and strengths she had never known she possessed. In learning to thrive in the mountains, she had learned to thrive as herself, unencumbered by the expectations and limitations that had defined her city existence. Standing once again on the porch where she had first watched mountain sunrise, but now with hands confident in their capabilities and a spirit at peace with its place in the world, Eleanor smiled at the recognition of how far she had traveled. The mountains had not changed her so much as revealed who she had always been beneath the layers of social conditioning and urban constraints. She had found not just love and partnership with Thomas, but something equally valuable, her own authentic self, capable and strong and perfectly suited to the life she had chosen in the high country where earth touched sky. Take a moment to reflect on Eleanor's journey from feeling out of place to discovering her true strength. Sometimes the places that challenge us most are where we find who we're really meant to be. What challenges in your life have revealed hidden strengths? Share your thoughts below, and remember that growth often comes disguised as difficulty.